Hello, how are you? I hope you're gesund, stark und fröhlich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope you're healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today we're actually going to talk about a subject which is health, spiritual health, which is obviously connected to physical health. So as usual, since the war started, October 7th, we added tzedakah. Gedel tzedakah shemakareves hagula, Mashiach now, we should win, etc. We're going to say a prayer which is very connected with the concept which we're going to talk about today. And this is one of my favorite parts of Jewish prayer. And it's the bracha that we say by Havdalah Motzoi Shabbos. Havdalah means to separate, distinction. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Hashem is blessed. Hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol, ben er l'choshech, ben Yisroel lo'amim, ben yoyim hashvil l'sheishes me'amaiser. Baruch atah Hashem Hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol. Blessed are you, Hashem, King of the universe, who makes a distinction between sacred and profane, between light and darkness, between Israel and the nations, between the seventh day and the 6 work days. Blessed are you, Hashem, who makes a distinction between sacred and profane. Now, in my very, very humble opinion, if we're going to speak about the generation and the current times, we could say that we're living in an age of confusion. To the very, very existential being of humanity. There's discussions of gender, and there's discussions of right and wrong, what's considered moral, etc. So people are confused, and their perspectives are sometimes completely warped. And obviously, as a person who's a Jew and who believes in the Torah, so we were given clear instructions. And this is what we're going to talk about today. In this week's Parsha Shemini, it speaks about the laws, the mitzvahs of kashrus. What's kosher and what's not kosher. So let's first talk about the issues which are interesting, and then we'll get to the essence of the concept as usual. So in this week's Parsha, we have the mitzvahs connected to kashrus, those animals that are kosher and those animals that are not kosher. But something which is a novelty, I believe, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not such a scholar, is that in the mitzvah of kashrus, generally speaking, as far as I understand, there's 6 mitzvahs. There's, you should eat kosher animals, kosher birds, kosher fish, that's 3 mitzvahs. And there's things you're not allowed to eat. But guess what? There's 3 mitzvahs that are connected with examining if something's kosher. The Chinuch brings down mitzvah Kuf Nun Gimel 153, 155, and he brings down 3 mitzvahs. Mitzvahs Bedika Simoni Behema V'chaya. It's a mitzvah. He says the Rambam counts it as a mitzvah to examine the signs of what's a kosher what's a kosher animal. Also, it's a mitzvah to examine the signs of what's a kosher bird. And the same thing, the mitzvah to examine what's a kosher fish and birds and chagovim. And the Chinuch brings down that the Ramban does not agree with the Rambam, but the Rambam counts it as 3 mitzvahs. Now, to me, this seems to be like a wild chidush. Because let's say we have halachi, shabai and esrig. So the mitzvah is to shake the 4 minim. And obviously there's what's considered a kosher lulav and a kosher esrig. But is there a mitzvah to know what the signs of a kosher lulav is? And what's a kosher esrig? The mitzvah is to shake it. You would think it's a mitzvah, it's an aver to eat treif. And that's it. But why would you say that there's a mitzvah to know the signs of what's a kosher animal and what's not? And it's a mitzvah to examine and to know what makes a kosher fish and what makes not a kosher fish, a treifa fish. I don't think you find it by any other mitzvah. Like, for example, karbonis. We have a mitzvah, bring this carbon. Is it a mitzvah to know what makes a animal unfit to be a carbon? And so on and so forth. There's so many mitzvahs in the Torah. Where do we find that there's such a mitzvah that it's a mitzvah to examine the tefillin or the tzitzis as a separate mitzvah? Of course, it's a precaution, but it's a mitzvah to know and to examine the signs, to know the signs, to make sure whether it's kosher or not. So the obvious question is, why do we find that by this, when it comes to eating kosher, we find such a novelty, 3 mitzvahs connected to examining and to knowing the signs, what makes it kosher? Now, together with that, there's another interesting thing, which is going to be connected with the whole concept. In the end of the parsha, after it speaks about all the signs of what's kosher, what's not kosher, it says, "V'leisa tamu," you should not become defiled. And the Gemara learns out from this that "V'leisa tamu bahem v'nitmeisem bum," and you become impure through them, defiled. So first it says v'nitmeisem, yeah, but it doesn't say it with an aleph. When it says you shouldn't become impure. And the word tomei has an aleph. And the Gemara learns out from this in Yuma, al tikkun meisem ella v'nitamten. You don't become defiled, but you become confounded, you become stuffed, you become dull. In other words, when a person does not eat kosher, something happens to his brain and his heart. In Chassidus, there's a concept which is called Timtum Alev and Timtum Amoyach. Timtum Amoyach and Timtum Alev, a dullness, a stuffing, a blockage of the mind and a blockage of the heart. And this is something which is very, very vital and threatening spiritually. Which means, Timtum Amoyach means it just doesn't hit the spot. You just don't get it. Sometimes you learn something, you're meant to be aroused, you should be getting inspired. For some reason, you're not getting inspired by anything. It's like you become paralyzed. Why? That's called Timtum Amoyach. You're meditating, you're trying, and nothing's working. You're not becoming stimulated, you're not becoming motivated, you're not becoming aroused. That's called Timtum Amoyach. It doesn't even hit the spot intellectually. And Timtum Alev is the same thing. If it doesn't hit the person on the brain level, that he doesn't become intellectually inspired, so then his heart can't become aroused and excited about whatever it is, positive things that he should be excited from. So I'm not going to elaborate now about what Timtum Amoyach and Timtum Alev means exactly, a blockage of the mind and a blockage of the heart. But in any case, I just want to bring out that eating kosher enhances your spiritual health, and eating treif, God forbid, endangers it. So let's look into this a bit deeper. For those of us who learn Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe in chapter 8 of the Tanya says something so astonishing. But first, let's talk about something I think we spoke many times. In general, I find this to be very, very fundamental and a navigating compass to be able to go through life. You know, you need a GPS, you need a compass. What's the compass? And this makes things very, very clear. Everything in the world falls into one of these 3 categories, according to Chassidus, and I'm not going to elaborate too much. There's Kedusha, that which is the realm of holiness. That's a pair of tefillin, that's a Sefer Torah, that's a mitzvah, that's Kedusha, a Jew. Then there's a realm which is called Klipas Noiga, literally translated as the translucent shell. That is permitted food. An apple falls into the category of Klipas Noiga. A gun also falls into the category of Klipas Noiga. A car falls into the category of Klipas Noiga, which means something which is neutral And it's dependent on the person how he's going to use it. If you use your car as a mitzvah machine to do mitzvahs with it, so then that klipas nega becomes elevated to holiness. If you use a car to do something prohibited, then you lower the car into the realm of sholosh klipas atmeis. See Tanya chapter 7 and 6 and 8 for an elaboration of all these concepts. So one concept is kedusha, one category. There's the other category which is called klipas nega, translucent shell. There's the third category which is called sholosh klipas atmeis, the three impure shells. That's, for lack of a better word right now, we'll call it evil. That which is prohibited. The permissible falls into the category of klipas nega. The prohibited falls into the category of sholosh klipas atmeis. Now the Alter Rebbe explains that when something is called osur, osur means tied up, bound up. So everything in the world has sparks and godly sparks, and it's our job to go into the world, mission of extraction, to elevate the sparks that's all around us. And when we take the physical world and we use it in a positive way, we redeem the godliness which is in the food. Just to speak quickly, if you have an apple over here, so we know that everything is Hashem. As the Baal Shem Tov taught us, Alts is the Rebishter and the Rebishter is Alts. But the question is dependent on you whether you are going to bring out that truth or not. If you eat the apple and you have in mind to use the energies in the apple to serve Hashem, and when you ate the apple, you made a blessing, and then you use that energy that you got from the apple to do something positive, that means you revealed that this apple is godliness. But if you ate the apple only as your hedonistic enjoyment and indulgence of the material, so then you didn't bring out the godliness that's in the apple. You brought out the selfishness, that's a sense of separateness from Hashem, that there could be something that didn't reveal godliness, even though that's not the true reality of what it is. So that's what's called klipas nega. It's a realm which, dependent on you, is going to be the truth of whether what it really is, its real essence, will be revealed or not. So now, in chapter 8 of the Alter Rebbe says something which is very, very sobering, and it means that the person learns a whole new approach when it comes to kashrut, which, without learning the Chassidus, the Kabbalah, which is behind the whole idea of kashrus, a person will never come to this. And the Alter Rebbe says as follows. I'm going to read inside the words, and you should look at it yourself and integrate it seriously. This is real serious. In addition to everything we explained before about things that are prohibited, when it comes to food which is prohibited, that shalakach nekrayim b'shem isur, therefore they're called isur, which means prohibited, but isur means also translated bound up. Mipnei sha'af mi sha'achal meichel isur b'loi hoida l'shem shamayim laver davaya b'koyach achilahi, which means you walked into a restaurant that has 10 rabbinical kashrut certificates from every single organization and Jewish group you could imagine. So you went into this establishment and you ate a piece of meat, but it was treif, and you didn't know about it, and there was no reason you should even suspect that there was something wrong with it. And you ate it l'shem shamayim. You ate it with the intention of serving Hashem. Lavid Hashem b'koyach achilahi, that you'll have the energy from this food to serve Hashem. And not only that you had this intention, the gampol v'oso came. You channeled that energy from that piece of not kosher food. You channeled that energy because of that extra energy that you got from your body, from that food. You actually prayed energetically, enthusiastically, with more power. But still, nevertheless, That sparks that was connected to the Shalosh Kibsat Meis did not get elevated. If you ate a food that was permissible, why? Because it's connected, it was connected to what's called the Shalosh Kibsat Meis. And then he goes on further, and he says that nothing will be able to elevate it back to holiness until if a person goes through something which is called Chibut HaKever. I don't want to get into it now. Look up chapter 8 yourself. But what he says is, and this is the main point, and this is the uniqueness when it comes to something which is not kosher, that once you ate it, that not kosher food, which became part of your body, leaves a negative impression. Because Mikol Michael Amashka Nasa take it Damu Basam Ibsari. It became part of your flesh. And over here the Alter Rebbe says something unique which does not exist by any other Aveira. Any other Aveira, you do an Aveira, and then you can move on. You could do tshuva, and it's forgiven. But by this problem, the problem of treif, it's in your system. It needs a whole different treatment that doesn't exist by any other problem. So it's much more grave and it's much more serious. And it's very interesting to note that there's a whole Gemara that talks about could a tzaddik make a mistake or not. And the Gemara says, like for example, it could be that a tzaddik forgets which day of the week it is, if it's a Shabbos or it's not, and there could be other mistakes that a tzaddik could make. But when it comes to food, Tosfos says over there, Midi da achila shani, when it comes to that, it's impossible that a tzaddik should make a mistake. Why? Because if he's taka a tzaddik, a holy person, it can never be that in his system was injected this poison. This Shalosh Kibsat Meis. Because once we're going to say that he made a mistake in something which is kosher and not kosher, as the Alter Rebbe describes at the beginning of chapter 8, that means that the poison's already injected. The toxicity. And once that toxicity is injected into a system, then it's like there's not any more pure good. What do we take from this? That concerning food, there's a greater danger than in any other thing that a person has to be careful from. Negative influences. And this changes the whole perspective on so many levels. First of all, let's say, for example, so many people that have a certain lax attitude when it comes to kashrus. They look into the ingredients of a product. Oh, it doesn't say pork. It doesn't seem like there's anything over here in the ingredients that should make it not kosher. So it's kosher. They look at everything as it's kosher unless they see something in the ingredients which means to imply that it's not kosher. Actually, the approach has to be just the other way around. Everything is not kosher unless you know specifically that it is kosher. Why? Imagine if I told you 1 ounce of something not kosher that will go into your system will kill you. Would you eat it? Would you even put something into your system if you had a doubt? And I was once by a Farbrengen from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was talking about kashrus, and he says, when the gates, sometimes the Rebbe would speak by Farbrengen and say, "B'shas makum tzagin tzayidin," when you go over to a Jew, and he was talking about like if you meet a Jew in the street or someone that's not affiliated, and he's not really living that lifestyle 100%, and we speak to him about kashrus, so you have to tell him there's a Jew diet. There's a Jew diet. And the Rebbe said, there's different diets. There's a salt-free diet. There's a sugar-free diet. There's different diets that a person has to have in order to be healthy. Then there's a diet for a Yid. The Eibishter chose the Jewish nation, and we have a certain spiritual sensitivity, and that spiritual sensitivity will become compromised and contaminated if we don't eat kosher. So the Jew diet is kashrus. And if we don't eat kosher, it's poison. In my yeshiva, different years, sometimes they had a student that was allergic to nuts. So as far as I understand, for younger kids, I think it's every single year, all the time. In our yeshiva, it's a yeshiva, all the students, so unless we know if it's not so big, so let's say we have 50, 60, 70 students, so if there's no students that are allergic to nuts, then it's not a problem. Someone could eat nuts. But in schools for younger children, elementary school, primary school, they have what's called a nut-free school. If you have a child, you can't give your child a peanut butter sandwich for lunch or a snack baggie of peanuts, because there might be a kid in the school that's allergic to nuts, and it could be fatal, literally fatal, and therefore the entire school can't bring in nuts. No child out of 250 students is allowed to bring in a peanut butter sandwich or a bag of nuts, because the wrong student who's allergic to nuts might have a nut. Now imagine we're talking about if we viewed kashrus in such a way, we have a spiritual sensitivity. Hashem knows what the composition, what is the chelik elikami mal mamish, a part of Hashem, and therefore we have to be super careful when it comes to kashrus, because if not, it's going to cause a contamination and defilement, as we learn after the Gemara in Yuma, that defilement means timtum. So that's one thing. The second thing is, we see from the Rebbe, when it came to, there's many stories about prisoners or different situations when it came to health. I had a friend of mine who got the sense of the Rebbe l'dai b'kashrus, to be very careful in kashrus. And I know that another person at Crown Heights I just met recently, told me that Rabbi Chanukov called him over and he told him that the Rebbe wants him, that person, to get involved in kashrus for prisoners, Jewish inmates. So the point is, let's see, you're looking at a person and you want him to improve spiritually, etc. You have to realize, as long as the person is eating treif, then whatever you're doing is counterproductive, because the poison, the toxicity, is entering your system more and more. So therefore, forget about everything else. Like put on tefillin with him, get him to give tzedakah, do good deeds with him. That's all very, very good. But in a certain sense, first and foremost, you have to make sure he's not eating treif. Because as long as he's eating treif, everything else you're doing is not going to be working properly 100%, because you're injecting him with poison, and the worst kind of poison you can imagine. So let's go back to the original. We started saying, Baruch Hashem, we have a Shulchan Aruch, we have a Torah, we have the Eibishter. And the Eibishter told us, this is Kedusha, this is Klippas Neiga, and this is Shkolos Klippas Atmeis. And we have to look at it as we understand in the physical sense, that there can be certain foods that are fatal and dangerous. In the same way, in the spiritual sense, we have to be super careful when it comes to certain things, that we shouldn't become contaminated, we shouldn't become corrupted, we shouldn't put something into our body which will make us paralyzed spiritually. Okay, so now we can understand Ulay Shleimar, why only by kashrus do we find this chidush of three mitzvahs that are connected, that are called a mitzvah which is bedikas simone behema v'chaya, mitzvahs bedikas simone dogim, and mitzvahs bedikas simone chagovim. Because since by kashrus and treifus, I forgot to say the lashon before, it's called the isur chefza. In other words, generally speaking, when it comes to Judaism, we say you're not allowed to do this. That's called the isur gavra, which means the prohibition is on the person. You are not allowed to do this. But then sometimes we speak about something which is called the isur chefza. We have an object, an entity, a particle, which the particle itself is an existence of negativity, so to speak. When it comes to kashrus, And when it comes to treif, we say that it's a chefza shel isur, that it's bound up with the negative forces, and you have to be so careful to stay away from it completely. When Mashiach comes, all these forces will be completely elevated. There won't be any more such an existence of a chefza shel isur. But right now, as we're in this world, the Eibishter made certain things, and he told us to stay away from these things, and these things are fatal if swallowed, spiritually speaking. But concerning what? Only concerning treif. By no other thing, by no other isser is there such a thing. So therefore, by no other isser is there such a thing that we have a mitzvah to examine and to be so careful about it and to know which signs make something kosher. And if you don't have those signs, then it's treif. Okay, there's one more point, but I see that the time has moved. There's another whole aspect, which is that a Jew has to realize our relationship to Hashem. I'm putting it just another aspect. Our relation to Hashem is 24/7. So therefore, in every single thing we do, since a Jew is one with Hashem, on every single level, in every single way. So, and this is really the difference between why Gentiles have 7 mitzvahs that connect them with Hashem, and the Jew has 613 mitzvahs. Because since Hashem chose us, we have a different connection, and our connection and our lifestyle is meant to reflect the nature of our relationship. So since we are the chosen nation, so therefore, Hashem tells us that when it comes to eating, there's eating in such a way which brings out the connection, the unification that you have with Hashem, and there's eating in such a way which separates you from Hashem. In other words, a Yid, his entire day is such a day that everything becomes either a conduit, another path to become united, or, God forbid, whatever you're doing is going to not bring out that connection, but in the opposite. Finally, last but not least, there's another whole concept of kashrus which is connected to the idea of, which I'm sure you heard already before, and the world even knows about this idea, you are what you eat. The kosher animals are all more the docile and domesticated and more refined, behemoths, so to speak. Not chayas, not jungle animals, not predators. Predators enjoy killing and are cruel. And then there's the other animals that are more refined. And one of the concepts of kashrus is that the animals that the Eibishter chose to say that this is kosher are the ones when you eat those animals, it brings out more refined characteristics. And if you would eat the animals that are treif, it would bring out chas v'sholem, negative tendencies and temperaments and dispositions which are actually bad for you. But that's that, of course, based on what we said before, if we're talking about the whole force, whether it's klipas nega, shalosh k'zat meis, and as the Alter Rebbe explains in Isser Chefza. So, maybe should help that if we do our part and we're more careful in kashrus, and means a whole different attitude in relation to ourselves, to be more careful, and in relation to the world, to realize that when we're dealing with somebody, to try to influence them in a positive way, to keep kosher, because once the person starts keeping kosher, we'll see tremendous changes all of a sudden on so many levels, because this is the healthy diet spiritually for a Yid. Maybe should help that we will do our thing. We're holding now still in Chodesh Nisan, before Chodesh Iyar. We should still see miracles, Nisim, take of Miad Mamish, Ki Meitzeis Chameret Mitzrayim and Leflois, Begula Mitzvah Shleima, take it from Yad Mamish. Good Shabbos, posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisborach, your man in Melbourne.